Good evening and welcome to Ducks in a Row Funeral Options 2.0. Let's go ahead and get started. People's Memorial Association would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Duwamish, and Suquamish nations on which we work and live. My name's Beverly, and I am the Communications Manager for People's Memorial Association, and I've got a couple housekeeping items before we get to the bulk of tonight's information. We have over 100 people signed up to be here tonight, so we're going to go ahead and keep everybody on mute just to cut down on the sound of our households and our lives being chaos around us. Don't worry about scrambling to jot down all your notes. This presentation has been frequently described to me as a little bit like taking a sip from a fire hose. So don't worry, we'll be recording, and I'll also make sure that you have a copy of our presenter slides to refer back to later on. We just want you to kind of focus in and soak up as much as you can. We imagine you're probably going to have a lot of questions, so please feel free to drop those in the chat box or use the Q&A feature. And if you're a little bit on the shy side, please feel free to send your message directly to me, and I promise to keep your identity secret. We'll be tackling those at the end after our presenter, just to manage our time as much as possible because there's just so much to talk about. First things first, what is People's Memorial Association? Well, I saw some familiar names on our registration list, but I imagine we've got some new folks around. So just in case you are new, well, we're the oldest and largest memorial society in the US. We were founded back in 1939 right here in Seattle. And we provide funeral education and advocacy services to all Washingtonians. And since we are kind of specific to Washington, we do kind of get questions. Well, what do I do if I move out of state, or I live, in Arizona during the winter, or my loved ones are on the East Coast? Don't worry, we're one of about 65 affiliated organizations around the country under the umbrella of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance. So it's distinctly possible there's a similar organization doing some similar work a little bit closer to your own home. To date, over 217,000 folks have become members of PMA. And of those folks, about 71,000 of them are still living, so we stay hopping in the office, as you might imagine. And in terms of how we serve those members, one of the biggest things we do is education, of course. Sessions like this and a whole bevy of resources hosted on our website and our Facebook and our Instagram. And someday I will figure out how to use Twitter and harness the power of hashtags, but today is not that day. On top of that education, we also do quite a bit of advocacy work here in Washington. We work to support our state level legislature in increasing funeral choice, increasing price transparency in a notoriously opaque industry, the funeral industry. And we also work to protect cultural rights. Here in Washington, we are truly blessed with an incredible diversity of people of different races and ethnicities and backgrounds, and all of those folks deserve equal access to affordable cremation or burial, aquamation or natural organic reduction, and all of the spiritual and emotional practices that go along with their traditions. So that's a pretty big thing that keeps us a little bit busy over here. As you might be already aware, today is actually part of a series called Ducks in a Row. We have one more session next week on estate planning, and we had a session last week on advanced care planning. So even if you can't make the session, please sign up use the registration form, and I'll make sure that you get a recording directly to your email. And if you're local, I'd love to see you out at the Greenwood Senior Center on the 30th. I will actually be giving an in-person presentation about greener funeral options. So if that part of today's presentation really speaks to you, I bet that presentation might help give you an even deeper understanding of that in your quest to learn more. I have to say thank you to our hosts. Pam Hunter is joining us here from the King County Library System. She's from the Glacier region. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Beverly. Good to see you all. I just wanted to mention a few things before we get started. The website for KCLS is kcls.org, and Beverly said she would put that in the chat for you. One of the things that you can find on our homepage at kcls.org is a list of all other kinds of online programs that we have. To find that, you just need to look at the calendar. So just click on calendar, and that will link you to all the various programs. Now, most of our buildings are open 6 days a week now, which was changed just about a month ago. We changed that. And then we also changed the mask requirement. As of last Saturday, people were still required to wear masks. Now it's completely optional. I have to say that about half of our public are coming in with masks, and half or not. So, you know, whichever you feel comfortable doing, you won't feel out of place either way. So in April, we're also going to make a change as far as in-person programming. So we've pretty much been doing everything online, but we will now be continuing to do online programming as well as beginning to do some in-building programming. So yeah. So I think that's it, Beverly, and thank you for including me in this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for the updates. I can't wait to see what sort of in-person offerings you all come up with. I was just after our last session taking a look at that calendar of yours, and I saw some great stuff on there. So I'd encourage all of you to visit that website I dropped in the chat. Okay, well, I know you're not here to see me and Pam. The real selling point is going to be our guest today, Rachel LeBlanc. She's joining us from the Co-op Funeral Home, where she's a funeral director intern. Welcome, Rachel. It's lovely to see you again.
Hi. Yes, thank you, Beverly. Let's see here. Can you see me?
I can.
Okay, good. Because for some reason, oh, there we are. All right. Yeah, my name is Rachel, and I am a funeral director, intern licensed at the Co-op Funeral Home of People's Memorial. But I just actually turned in my application to become a fully licensed funeral director.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I know, and my boss, managing funeral director Kimberly Forsyth, and I just figured out that I've served like over 300 families in the year and a half that I've been here. So please believe I may be an intern, but I have the experience to back what we'll be discussing today.
Oh, some folks are saying congratulations on your milestone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hand it over to you now.
Okay, let me share that. You can see my screen share? Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so as I said, serve a lot of families, and I talk about death all day. And much of that time is spent talking to family and friends of the deceased. So one of the first questions we ask in those discussions is some form of what will we be helping arrange for you? And the best case scenario answer to this question is when the next of kin says that not only have they discussed with their deceased loved one what they want to have happen, but they also put it down in writing. And here in Washington State, the best way to ensure that you get in death what you wanted in life is to put it in writing. And often people do that through their will. However, People's Memorial Association, which I'm going to call PMA through this presentation, has a handy form that's sent out to all of our members, which is formatted to make it really simple to spell out what you want, as you can see here on the slide. Legally, whatever document you use has to be signed and dated by you, and then also by a witness. And the witness does not need to be a notary public. Here's the thing, it also doesn't have to be a fancy form. You could literally write, I, your name, want a cremation on a piece of scrap paper, sign and date, and have a friend sign and date as a witness. Give the copies to your trusted contacts who will be handling your arrangements, and that is legally binding here in Washington State. Be sure to mention the law to make it really official, RCW 6850-160 listed there on the top of the form. But we do have the easy forms available from PMA, so please reach out to the membership office to have one sent to you if you don't have it already. Okay, so maybe you didn't get a chance to put into writing, you weren't expecting to die so soon. But the next best answer is when your trusted contact tells us that they're certain what you wanted because you both discussed it. This is wonderful too. I know it's taboo in our culture to talk about death, but it's unavoidable. It's inevitable. So we need to get the discussion going with our loved ones. Obviously, you're tuned in today with me to get educated on your choices. So that's a great start. And I'm very glad you're here with me. So if your trusted contact at least knows what you wanted, they can very easily sign the paperwork with the funeral home authorizing what they'll be doing with your body. Obviously, the hardest time for a next of kin is when they have no clue what to do with you. There is no discussion, and now they're hearing different things from various family members. Aunt Susie wants a cremation, Cousin Diane wants a full conventional burial, and the contact that we're talking to is in the middle of trying to sort it out. And here's what we're going to be talking today. There are 5 legal options: cremation, alkaline hydrolysis, natural organic reduction, burial, and full body donation. This is where I want to underscore, death is not an emergency. The possible chaos and stress of dying is fortunately over, and though it definitely feels like a heavy burden to those left behind, working with the funeral home should be relaxed and handled in a way that leaves everyone feeling like you were treated in death with respect in the way that you should be. I tell families all the time, no rush, I'm working at your pace. The absolute best way to help your next of kin avoiding stress is to discuss what you want, fill out your paperwork ahead of time, and plan what funeral home you'll be entrusting with your remains. None of this is an emergency, and it's so much easier to figure out now, even if you're perfectly healthy and young and don't think you're going to need this for decades. Why not start as soon as you are comfortable to? So I'll just talk about next of kin, trusted contact. Who am I talking about here? Let's go over the Washington state law determines who has the authority to tell me as the funeral director what to do with your remains. So first and foremost, the top tier is that piece of paper that I just showed you a couple slides ago, or something in a will that has your wishes on it, signed and dated with the witness sign and date, that you're going to do as soon as this talk is over, right? But seriously, your own written disposition takes authority over anything else, especially if you have a prepaid arrangement. That's great too. Beyond putting into writing what you wish to have happen, another thing you can put into writing is a designated agent. So much like the disposition authorization form, you must sign and date and have a witness sign and date a form designating an agent for your funeral arrangements. Again, the witness doesn't need to be a notary public, and PMA has a handy form for this too. The designated agent is similar to a power of attorney, but for funeral arrangements. And this form is useful for those who may wish to have a non-family member, such as a good friend or an unmarried significant partner, oversee their cremation or burial arrangements. Declaring someone your designated agent in writing, again, signed, dated with a witness sign and date, takes precedence over anyone else in your biological family. So let's say you didn't fill out either of those. Then the state puts the following family in charge. So first, your legal spouse or registered domestic partner. If they don't exist, then it falls to your children over the age of 18. If you have more than 2 children, we must collect a majority consensus. And this is for Washington state. I actually just helped with someone who's flown in from New York. And I found out in New York state, like they only need 1 family member to sign. So it's all over the place across the country, but here in Washington, it has to be majority if there's more than 1 next of kin. So with children, if there's 3, then it's 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5, and so on. If there's no adult children or spouse that exist and your parents are still alive, then we must gain authorization from them. If both your parents are also deceased, then it falls on your siblings to make the decision. And I have to share, siblings often have the hardest time with a death. If your siblings are left to make your arrangements, I would highly, highly recommend doing your sisters and brothers a favor and filling out that disposition authorization or designated agent forms now. If there's no immediate family, perhaps you're under a court-appointed guardianship or a state agency. They would be in charge of deciding, and almost always they'll simply choose cremation. After all of that, if you have no immediate family members and aren't under the care of the state, then we simply go with what the law calls most responsible party available. We would make an effort to locate some family member, such as an uncle or grandparent, and if they aren't available, then the friend or neighbor who called us to inform us of your death, we would proceed with making the arrangements with them. If the legally appointed next of kin cannot make a decision or there is no one to be located whatsoever, then once 90 days passed from your date of death, the funeral home or medical examiner makes the decision, which is almost always cremation being the least expensive choice. So who's responsible for payment? Legally, the next of kin or designated agent is responsible for an equal percentage if there's more than one. In practice, though, 99% of families I've served have had one point person handle the payment, who usually has access to the deceased estate from which, they refund themselves. If there's no money whatsoever, each county has an indigent cremation fund. But this would be essentially having the county step in to make the decisions for you. In that case, usually the remains aren't returned to the family. If you went that way, the state does an annual scattering somewhere. PMA does also have a cremation assistance program for families in need with application information on their website. We could expound further on next of kin, but that's the general overview, and we only have like an hour here today. So what are these options you have at your literal disposal? Let's start with cremation, since it's the most widely selected. In fact, in Washington state, approximately 80% of our citizens are cremated. It's amazing. This makes sense, since according to one of the textbooks they make you read to have this job, cremation is the oldest form of disposition in human history. It's the top choice as it's very accessible, being the lowest cost option available. Per PMA's biannual price survey, where they research as many funeral homes' general price lists across the entire state every other year that they can, the cost of cremation varies wildly in Washington state. The average cost is $1,600. For PMA members, the cost is significantly lower at $845 at partnering funeral homes. It's also the quickest process, taking about 4 hours and slightly longer depending on size, and then another few hours for the remaining bones to be cooled before being processed into ashes returned to the family. Of course, as we're all familiar with those can be placed into an urn, set on a shelf, as seen here in this photo, placed at a cemetery, either buried in the ground, a memorial wall, or a columbarium. This is me here at Chapel of the Chimes in Oakland. They have a very fancy, amazing columbarium there, but you can see the niches with these are urns in the background of me there. You can spread on land too, technically legally. You may spread the ashes on your own private property or with permission on another person's land and state or national parkland. You can also spread the ashes in water, so long as it's a navigable waterway. And fun fact, when it's not COVID time, which I haven't checked now that things are opening back up, but you can even pre-arrange with the Washington State Ferries Department to toss your loved one's ashes held in a biodegradable urn from a ferry. They'll even pause, make a solemn announcement over the PA, and then toot the foghorn. It's so cool. I know, but yeah, call them now that things are opening back up. I know they had paused that during COVID. And here's some biodegradable. They're wrapped in plastic, but we take that off, as you can see here. Those are biodegradable ones that we sell. This is also a scattering urn that's pretty popular for our clients. Has a little, I kind of call it like a spice jar. You just open a little hole and pour the ashes out. There's also all sorts of fancy things you can do with cremated remains, like combine them with sterling silver for jewelry, blend them into blown glass pieces. I've heard of people putting them in pencils or even vinyl records. I got an email from a company that's pressing them into diamonds. Since we've been creating since the dawn of fire, we've come up with some pretty clever things to do with ashes. So here's some frequently asked questions regarding cremation. Yes, a witness cremation is an option. This means you can watch the placement of your loved one into the machine called a retort. You don't see anything gruesome, just the placement and the door closing. This is often requested for certain religions, such as Hinduism. However, families of many backgrounds request it as a touching final goodbye. You are allowed to place items with your loved one's body to be cremated too. And I've seen all sorts of things, from photos of beloved trinkets to a certain leafy green plant people love here in Washington State. Glass and batteries are a huge no-no for cremation retorts. So those would be the main restrictions of what you could not include. Dad's well-worn hat, yes. Dad's old bifocals, no. And the other questions we receive from time to time: no, you cannot obtain the remaining bone fragments in their bony state. Legally, we must process the bones into what the state calls unrecognizable ashes. Also, returning gold teeth fillings is not really a thing. Firstly, fillings containing gold have such a nominal amount of gold. They're mainly base metals, which cremate with the rest of your body. However, for families insistent they want the fillings, they must hire a specialist dentist to come extract the tooth at the mortuary, which can be quite expensive. Given how little gold actually is in the filling, the only person who makes money off the ordeal is the dentist. And for implants, we can usually return a titanium implant to the family if requested. However, generally that remaining metal is simply recycled as well. Overall, cremation is tried and true, and it is the lowest cost, and there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of handling the body before, with viewings and witness placements, and options for the remains after. So we're all familiar with how cremation used fire. However, there's a newer option in town, which is quite similar, but uses water. So here's a cremation retort on the left. And then here's an alkaline hydrolysis machine on the right. Legally known as alkaline hydrolysis, this is the one I'm like super excited about. Aquamation became an option in May of 2020 here in Washington State. I personally arranged the first case that happened here in Washington in October of 2020. Proud moment. It's currently only legal as an option in about 20-ish states. I should have looked, but I think it's still only legal in about 20 states and a few Canadian provinces. However, it's not a new process. It was patented in 1888 and has been used for about the last 25 years at such institutions as the Mayo Clinic, UCLA, and Duke University. While it's slowly catching on, more and more people are choosing it, as it is perhaps the most environmentally friendly option. It uses about 1/6 of the amount of energy, depending on the type of machine, as a cremation, so a fraction of the energy required for cremation. And there are 0 direct carbon emissions. Much like cremation, your body is placed into a machine, as I showed you in this first picture here. And this one fills up with pressurized water and a bit of alkaline solution, roughly 15% of the total volume. This may seem like it would use a lot of water, but comes out to be about the same amount that you would have used in a regular day. The cost is more than cremation, however, still accessible when compared to other options. Not too many funeral homes in Washington State offer it yet, as there's only the one machine operating in the state currently. But for PMA members, the cost at funeral home partners who are offering aquamation is $1,250 and $1,500 for non-members. And like I said, the prices like cremation kind of vary with other non-PMA funeral homes. Being new, aquamation wasn't included in last year's PMA price survey, but I have seen other funeral homes in the state charging around $2,000 to $3,000 for aquamation. So yeah, it can vary greatly depending on which funeral home you choose for this as well. Like cremation, aquamation on average takes about 4 to 6 hours. And when it's done, what also remains are your bones, which are processed into a powder similar to the ashes you receive for cremation. And I did get permission for this. Oh, I should have told you guys, I'm about to show a photo of aquamated remains. But yeah, so this is very powdery. They haven't been carbonized by the flame. So it's the color of bone rather than that kind of gray, ashy look that you get with cremation. And there is about 30% more. And aquamated remains can then be treated the exact same as cremated remains, whether placed into an urn or scattered, all the options I mentioned before for cremated remains. Some more tidbits about this process, just so you're aware, because there's some different names floating around out there. So if you hear any of these, you'll know what they're talking about. Aside from aquamation, alkaline hydrolysis is also known as resumation, flameless cremation, water cremation, and other euphemisms. It is essentially an accelerated version of the natural process that would happen with your body after death. So it is seen as a gentler option to flame-based cremation. Your body is reduced down to its most basic molecular building blocks. You can also have a witness aquamation, where you would simply watch the deceased be placed into the machine and the door closed. With either cremation or aquamation, you can even press the start button if that's something you're into. Unlike cremation, though, you can't place anything into the machine with the body. There are very few exceptions, like state law requires the person be wrapped in biodegradable bags before placement, and 100% raw silk or leather could be used. But that does depend on the facility's process policies. And like with cremation, any metal from implants or fillings and whatnot would simply be recycled. I think a way a client summed it up for me, with permission to share with you, explains perfectly why people are choosing aquamation. Quote, when mom passed, we were looking for other options besides the standard cremation or embalming. We wanted something more peaceful and respectful of the earth. We came across aquamation. This was an appealing option for us for several reasons. Water is a symbol of transformation and rebirth. Mom was an English teacher for 42 years and was always looking for symbolism. It felt more like a peaceful option for us than fire cremation. We also liked that the remains were not as ashy, so to speak. They're more fine and pure. Due to this, there's also more of her. We also loved that as a greener option. They're very happy with their choice. And then I kept this photo of Dion Strummer since it makes Beverly giggle every time she sees it. He's a pioneer of getting alkaline hydrolysis as an option across the United States. And this is him in his machine down in Portland, Oregon. So it makes me giggle too. Okay. So a third option that's definitely gets a lot of popularity too, that you have above ground, which was legalized in May of 2019 and also in effect May 2020 with aquamation, is natural organic reduction. You may have heard this option referred to as Recompose, which is the company name who pioneered it, or as they plainly state, human composting. And you can see compared to the cremation retort and alkaline hydrolysis machine, what Recompose's vessel looks like there. So all three of these kind of have a similar look in material, or, equipment is the word I'm looking for there. And Recompose's founder and her team have been working on this process and its legalization since 2014. It was originally, here's her and her team. It was originally under the name the Urban Death Project, becoming the iteration they are today, which is a public benefit corporation in 2017. They worked alongside institutions like Western Carolina University's Forensic Anthropology Department and Washington State University. And there is one other entity that offers natural organic reduction here in Washington, and they are called Return Home. So here's a couple of photos from them as well. This is their operator who is packing up some dirt. This used to be a person here, and now it's this lovely, great dirt that's completely usable for gardening or whatever. It does not have any remnants of having been a person. And then this is what Return Home's setup looks like. You can see that they allow their clients to decorate their vessels. So to our veterans, and then the one here has like a blanket and a piece of art on it. And then here's what Recompose's vessels look like. And I think there's also a third in Washington trying to get off the ground, but by and large, it's Recompose or Return Home would be the two funeral homes if you wish to have this option. It was engineered here in Washington and legalized in Oregon and Colorado. And Recompose has been doing a lot of work to try to get it legalized across the country. PMA actually had a hand in bringing the legislation here in Washington. They handled their first case, Recompose handled their first case in December of 2020. And currently Recompose is comparable to the full cost of a barrel. You can see the costs here. Recompose is $7,000 and Return Home is $4,950. And our PMA members do receive a 5% discount off the cost if you're pre-planning with Recompose, and 20% off the cost if choosing Return Home. And both of these businesses handle their clients directly, serving as both facility and funeral home. So if that's an option that you want to explore, I would recommend to reach out to either of them directly for more information. But much like cremation and aquamation, your body is placed into a vessel. However, instead of being surrounded by flame or water, you're surrounded by plant material, such as wood chips, alfalfa, and straw, containing microbes who love to get to work, reducing your body into its basic molecular level. So it's actually quite similar to aquamation in that regard, as it too is essentially an accelerated process of what would happen naturally if you were just buried in the ground, except your body returns to the earth in about a month's time. And what remains for all intents and purposes is just a nutrient-dense soil, about 1 cubic yards worth. And the deceased next of kin then has the option to receive the soil for their own use, or I believe that both companies have partnerships where you can donate the resulting dirt to help with rehabilitation, land trust work out across the state. There's no trace of the soil having originated from a human. I think I already said that when the process is complete. And as with cremation and aquamation, any lingering metal would be sifted out and recycled. And Recompose is really capturing attention because it's so revolutionary. Aquamation is pretty dang eco-friendly, but it probably doesn't get much more eco-friendly than natural organic reduction. It is a limited choice since there's just those two facilities right now between Recompose and Return Home, but they're both dedicated organizations, and it's been really exciting to watch this option unfold. And yeah, both organizations have websites that you can go to check them out. Okay, so I know we've been talking about these exciting new options, but there's a lot of merit in burial, I think, and certainly a lot of choice with this option too. Obviously, burial is an option we humans have been doing since the dawn of time, with a wide range of placements, from graves to catacombs and even inside churches. Conventional burial, in the sense of how we imagine it here in the United States, really only became the accepted norm in the 1860s, with many cultural aspects taking root around that same time. And today people can really make burial such a personalized option with their own ideas and tastes of how it should be handled. And I know for many families, doing a traditional burial, which includes embalming and a really nice casket, is really important culturally, which I am here for. Totally respect. I personally kind of love planning traditional burials the best because of my event planning background. But yeah, so I think burial is certainly a great option for those who want to do it and super important for them. And so whether you're doing a conventional or green, burial must be done within a legal cemetery. So along with talking to a funeral home to handle the arrangements and paperwork, you all also need to contact the cemetery of your choice. Burial can cost, based on PMA's price survey of nearly every funeral home in Washington state, on average about $2,900, $2,900 for the funeral home fee for direct burial, which is no ceremony whatsoever. It's just simply the funeral home bringing the casketed deceased to the cemetery. Plots or graves at cemeteries typically start around $2,000 and go up from there. So for a burial, you should plan to set aside at least $5,000. Though you will likely also include other expenses like the casket, preparation requests, and any other upgrades like a hearse or special monuments. So when you're making these decisions for burial, you largely have two avenues, conventional and green, though you can certainly combine aspects of green into conventional. And let me see where my slide is. I don't have a slide on conventional burial. So conventional is, as I was saying, what we tend to picture as Americans when we hear burial. So the deceased is likely embalmed, dressed, and placed into typically a metal casket, which is then placed into a grave with a liner or vault, such as a layer of concrete in the grave. Green is somewhat the opposite. So the deceased is not embalmed and is placed in a biodegradable casket, typically 100% wood, though there are some woven basket-like options using seagrass or bamboo like pictured here, or even an organic cotton shroud here on the right. I did have one case where the deceased mother had made this beautiful silk shroud years and years ago, and she wanted to use it for her own burial. It was a really lovely, personalized aspect of the burial. So, like I said, it's gonna be really important for families. And it's great how personal burial can be. And then the casket or shroud is placed directly into the earth for a green burial, usually in a more shallow grave than what's used for conventional burial, because the level of dirt helps with everything. And then there's no liner or vault for a green burial. And with conventional burial, cemeteries will have a predetermined aesthetic and landscape. And Washington State has 6 cemeteries that offer dedicated green burial plots, in which the family is encouraged to select a plant or two to be planted on top of the grave, or in a few of the cases, the land itself is a conservation forest. So you're buried among the existing trees. And I should say that I think because green burial is becoming more and more of an option, I've been hearing other cemeteries that are also starting to include parts of their cemeteries, not the whole cemetery, but we're going to make this section over here the green burial one. So I say 6, but more and more cemeteries are starting to offer it. In either cemetery type, it's a good to understand that purchasing a plot is not purchasing the land. The cemetery still has full ownership over the property and can decide its own rules and policies. So for instance, vaults are typically required for conventional burial as it helps keep the lawns level, making easier for caretaking. The cemetery also gets to decide size restrictions on monuments or markers, hours of visitation, and other aspects of personalizing the gravesite. So while you're thinking about your options, if burial resonates with you, Also make a list of what's important to you in a cemetery so that you can come prepared with questions when you talk to one. Also note that unlike funeral homes, cemeteries are actually not legally required by federal law to provide you with a price list. So often you can't find their fees on their websites or even over the phone. You really have to start getting into it with them to get the pricing. So some frequently asked questions about burial. No, you cannot be buried on your own private land unless you want to go through the process of turning your property into a legal cemetery. Embalming is not a requirement anywhere in the United States, so don't feel pressured to have it done if a funeral home tries to persuade you into it. A person can be placed in a casket not only fully closed, but also with relics from their life. I remember one fun family buried dad with like a bottle of whiskey, a pack of cigarettes, a knick-knack, and other various hymn items. So on that note, families sometimes ask if another person's ashes or their pet's ashes can be placed in the casket. That's definitely per the cemetery's policy. So be sure to ask them what is acceptable to bury beyond the casket and deceased when you have those conversations with them. And as I mentioned, you can certainly make greener options, even if you choose a conventional cemetery. So you could elect to be embalmed with a biodegradable casket, even though there'll still be a concrete grave liner. That is certainly something that many of our families choose when they choose burial. On the other hand, though, oh, I already said that, so never mind, skipping that part of my speech. The really important point in all of this discussion today is to help you consider what will be important for yourself and your loved ones when you come to the end of your time in this current form. So, like I said, there's a lot of hoopla around aquamation and human composting, but if you feel like, traditional burial with embalming and a really elegant metal casket and a motorcade to a beautiful cemetery is what's important to you, own it, do it, go for it. Okay, so question that we get asked is full body donation. So there are a couple of institutions here in Washington who do accept full body donations, UW, Bastyr, and Wazoo. You can donate your entire body or some of your tissues, such as your corneas or certain organs. Sight Life handles corneas, and Life Center Northwest handles organ and tissue donations. It's a wonderful gesture to give yourself to science. I know I used to wish for something like being sent to the Forensic Osteology Research Facility of Western Carolina University, but I think I decided it would be too much trouble to fly me out to such a location. If this is an option you want to have for yourself, you absolutely should reach out to the institution of your choice to confirm their policies and eligibility. They usually have a number of restrictions in place, so it's good to gain the best understanding possible and have a second disposition option in case it doesn't work out. You may also still need to decide which of the other options should be carried out after the program has completed their needs with your donation. Also, I get asked this all the time. I just did again today, but just because your driver's license says you're a donor does not necessarily mean you will be one. This is at the discretion of the hospital where you may die. And honestly, the criteria is such that a lot of people are not considered viable to be a donor. So I definitely advise to do research if you are interested in anatomical donation. So beyond type of disposition, and I know we're getting to the end here, and I'm gonna talk fast. What are other options for you to consider? What are your cultural and personal traditions? If you're being buried, either full body or as cremation or aquamation remains, will there be a graveside service or a direct burial to the cemetery? For any option, do you wish to have a funeral where your body is present at a location such as a church or simple viewing at the mortuary, or none at all? Perhaps a memorial where the body is not present, so only loved ones gathered in memory. Home funerals are also encouraged here at PMA. And going back to that slide, we have had at least one partner funeral home who specializes in helping families arrange them. In fact, often families who choose a home funeral do so that the funeral home is involved as little as possible. Typically, the family would prepare the body with washing and dressing before it lays in state in the home for up to 3 days. Dry ice or some other form of cold keeping would be used to prolong condition before the body is transferred to the crematory or cemetery. Caring for one's dead directly has been the norm for centuries. In fact, it is only quite recent that it's experienced or expected to have a third party like a funeral home involved. There has been a movement in the last decade, especially to return to this mode. However, the majority of people definitely still choose to work with the funeral home for simplicity and ease. So I know that all of these questions can be a bit overwhelming, but we at PMA absolutely recommend to think about your choices, spend time talking with your loved ones while you're leisurely and comfortably can think about them, and put them down in writing. Don't forget those signatures. So it's as simple as saying, here, she wrote it down for us, to the funeral director. On that note, let's quickly go over the funeral home role and all of this and how you can feel empowered to make the right choice for you. So generally, the funeral home, the director's job is to help you with filing the necessary paperwork to make any of this happen. So for instance, with my day-to-day, I'm filing the death record with the county and the state. We're each going to go sign off on what they need to sign off on, as well as ensuring that the doctor adds the cause of death in a timely manner. There's so many signatures in death care, so that I get what Washington calls a burial transit permit. And this permit's required by the crematory, by the facility doing alkaline hydrolysis, for natural organic reduction, for the cemeteries. Everybody needs this permit that the funeral director obtains from the government before we can carry out the disposition. Of course, at the immediate time of death, we're coordinating with our transport team and whoever is the best contact at your place of death to bring you into our care. We'll also be talking to your next of kin, as I discussed in the opening section, to determine what will be happening with your body. And from there, we'll help coordinate whatever additional needs are involved, like the crematory, cemetery, church, etc. We can also help you with extras you wish to add, like cremation jewelry or casket options. And of course, working with a PMA partnering funeral home means that those choices are yours to make, no upselling involved. With that said, when you're deciding on a funeral home, I always tell family and friends, be sure that you feel comfortable with the funeral director. Remember, you are, after all, a customer with this person providing you with a service. I hate to put it that way, but that's essentially, they're providing you a service, you're the customer. So if for any reason you're not feeling it, much like how you would leave a restaurant if they were giving you bad vibes, you can certainly decide that you don't want to go with that funeral home down the street from your home. Like, read reviews, ask people you trust, consult the PMA price survey, do some research on the funeral home you'll be using as well to ensure that they respectfully will carry out your wishes. You can technically do virtually all of the process yourself, including driving the deceased to the cemetery or crematory, preparing them for burial, and so forth, with perhaps only involving a funeral director to file the paperwork for the burial transit permit. However, in this day and age, practically everyone finds it much easier to have a funeral home involved. though I do love when a family wants to get involved as much as possible to make it a truly personalized experience. This has certainly been an information-packed hour. I hope that it's given you somewhat of a start toward discussing your funeral with your loved ones and researching what options resonate with you. And we do have a slide about prepayment. Prepayment means that you trust someone else to properly manage your money. In Washington state, it does have to be placed in escrow. So like our funeral home would basically be starting a life insurance policy. You can also do things like opening a pay upon death savings account. We often recommend that. And typical life insurance policies, that's also what they're there for. They call them life insurance policies, but really it's your death insurance policy. So also, I've mentioned this a few times, but just to completely spell it out, the 1984 funeral rule set in place by the Federal Trade Commission stipulates that a funeral home has to provide you with a price list, especially once you've stepped foot into the funeral home. So just know that the law's on your side as a funeral consumer to help protect you from, being taken advantage of or feeling pressured to do anything that you don't want to do. So yeah, thanks so much for joining me. And we'll take questions now, I guess.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, no matter how many times I see this, I swear I learn something new every time. It's like we've only got about 6 minutes. So I'm going to try and get us through as many questions that the participants have submitted as possible. But if you feel like your question wasn't answered to the extent of what you're hoping for, or we didn't even get to you at all, no worries. We're going to make sure that you have contact information for both me at PMA and Rachel at the Co-op Funeral Home, as well as the recording of this presentation and the slides. So we'll just hit you with so much information. You're going to have everything to refer back to. And of course, we want you to reach out to us with your questions. We're in this education thing because we want you to make empowered choices. So let's take a look here. Couple questions coming in now. Well,
and sorry, CJ, for bouncing around. That's good feedback on.
Yeah.
Trying not to do that too much, but I was like, whoops, this is, yeah. So
we made some updates to the presentation.
Thanks for that feedback.
So
yeah,
we'll work on that. No problem.
Yeah. Next time there'll be less slide bouncing around, I promise.
Just trying to give you that excitement. Okay, so folks are kind of curious. You mentioned recycling of hardware like titanium hip implants, for example. What does it mean to recycle them? Does the family have to recycle them? Will the funeral home do it? What is that? Do you have to recycle it?
Yeah, the crematory would handle recycling, so the family or funeral home doesn't have to worry about it. And depends on location, but as far as I know, it can either be like a regular recycling facility, or I know that there exists like specific businesses have cropped up that are like funeral related recycling facilities. But yeah, just regular, because it's regular metal. So usually titanium is the one that can't be cremated with. So yeah, family doesn't have to worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, technically, no, you don't have to recycle. Like on our cremation forms, you can specify that you want those pieces returned to you. I will say that like our crematory requires you providing the code, the number code that's apparently printed on your implant, so that they have that paper trail that yes, this is your mom's. They're not just giving you somebody's random implant, that you had the number and here's the number. So if having the part returned to you is important, like figure out from your doctor's office what the barcode on your thing is to get it back from us.
Yeah, and if that's something important to you, don't be shy about asking. I imagine between Rachel and I, we've probably heard just about everything, and we're never going to judge you.
Somebody earlier today asked, like, oh, I have this weird question. It was not, trust me, there's no
there's no weird questions with the funeral home.
Well, that's not a challenge though, just in case you guys are thinking. Okay, well, speaking of green burial, can folks that do a green burial, can they have a marker on their grave or no?
Yeah. Depends on the cemetery, but like for instance, Moles up in Bellingham or just north of Bellingham, the markers are like big boulders that are engraved. There's one in Snohomish that you can pretty much have whatever sort of traditional monument you have. I don't remember about White Eagle. That's one of the conservation ones I was mentioning earlier. I don't know what they do, but yeah, that's definitely a good question for the cemetery. But yeah, most of them are still marked.
Yeah, they might just look a little different than what you're accustomed to. So certainly touch base with those folks because cemeteries are allowed to set their own rules.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's kind of curious about those rules. Let's say you're buried in your grave and you don't have any descendants, or your ashes are housed in a beautiful columbarium, but 50 years have gone by and you don't have any descendants. How are your remains in the space you occupy cared for? Is there like a maintenance fee that you pay, or is that included when you purchase those services? Or will they just toss you out? What's the story on perpetuity here?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So most cemeteries have like an endowment fund baked into their cost, which is also why like buying a plot can be so expensive, because they are trying to account for you being in their cemetery forever, essentially. I mean, that is the idea. Like we hear on the news of like, oh, they needed to build a Walmart, so they took the cemetery out. But like, for the most part, like cemeteries are there forever and you're there forever, regardless if, all of your family has also died too.
Well, that's really only true in some countries, like the United States. There are places in Europe that don't have grave perpetuity. You rent the space.
That's true. But we're talking about Washington State here. So
I know, but I got to throw around the little trivia that I do notice. So
it's true. It's true. I know. I mean, we don't have that much time, but yeah, I heard about that. How like, they're like, well, you're already decomposed, so we're turning out your grave for somebody else, but not here in Washington State.
Well, speaking of, reaching that capacity, someone's wondering what happens if, you had your heart set on an aquamation or natural organic reduction, but at the time you die, those facilities are full up and they can't accept you. Does that happen?
No, I mean, especially with aquamation, I wish it was that popular that was turning people away. But no, the care facilities have refrigeration units, which legally we have to place you into as soon as you're brought into our care, per state law. So yeah, in either instance, you be in the refrigerator and just waiting out your turn. I know like with Recompose, they have limited capacity right now. And I don't think they've turned people away. I don't know. That's a better question for Recompose. I don't want to like misconstrue. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, with aquamation, like if that's what you're into, please give me a call, because we'll get you through in a week or two. Like there's no line for aquamation right now, unfortunately.
Well, and it's important to remember that those businesses are also classic funeral homes. So they would operate the same way as you would if there were a whole lot of burials that needed to happen, or cremations. And I think we all got sort of a peek into the back end of that at the beginning of the pandemic about the contingency planning that goes into that when you have more folks than you've got space for.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we saw that in the news. But yeah, we're going to get you taken care of. It's very rare that a funeral home's turning away business.
That's fair. For a peek behind the curtain there, when someone is cremated, what is their body placed inside of, or did they just go in there just in their birthday suit? What happens?
Yeah, so in Washington State, like I said, every state has different laws. So I'm just going to quote Washington State's. But for Washington State's law, you have to be placed into some sort of cremation container. And the most basic is a composite, aka cardboard box. So yeah, you're not just placed into the retort. you have to be placed into some sort of container, whether it's that cardboard one, or I've had families, really want to do a casket. A lot of casket designs can also be cremated. So yeah, you have to be placed into some sort of container before being placed into the machine. And then, yeah, people are buried with, naked or fully dressed, or like I said, a whole, like half their belongings, maybe not that much. Crematory might have a problem if there's that much stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's really refreshing to hear that we get so much say in the way that our bodies are handled, because we all are kind of socialized to think that, well, you got to hand it over to the funeral director and they'll do whatever they want. But the idea that you can be cremated in your footy pajamas, with your favorite book is kind of comforting. And people are curious if that same level of freedom applies to after the cremation. Like, can your family do whatever they want with the ashes? Are there laws?
There's laws restricting like where you're supposed to scatter them. So like I mentioned earlier, technically you're supposed to restrict it to private property that either you own or someone that has given you permission to. You can do it on state land, but don't go to Disneyland and put it in the haunted house. They hate that.
They hate that, and it's a problem.
It is a problem. There's rules and laws and restrictions out there, but I haven't really heard. I mean, like I was saying, you can put it in waters so long as it's a navigable waterway, not really like a thin moving creek. That's probably not a good idea. But by and large, there's so much you can do with cremated remains. So.
Can you travel with them, or do you need like special paperwork?
We will issue, it's automatically part of the problem. Oh yeah, thank you, Gloria. Looks like people are checking out. We will automatically issue you what's called a burial transit permit. And so if you're traveling within the United States with cremated or aquamated remains, we have boxes from the mortuary that are TSA approved. And I always just tell families it's easiest just to put it on your carry-on so that it goes through the x-ray machine. And usually TSA won't have any questions, especially for that box, because it's just a plastic.
They're real squeamish and they don't make a lot of money. So they're not too curious if you say it's an urn. I've tested this a couple times.
Yeah. If you have an urn that's got like something crazy with it, or it's like a solid thick metal, like they might make you open it up so they can like make sure there's nothing else in the urn. But yeah, by and large, it's going to go through the x-ray machine and you're not going to have a problem. But if they have any questions, you have that burial transit permit that's just automatically issued. It's not something special the funeral home needs to do. In Washington State, it's automatic. And you can show that to TSA if they have any questions. Now, every country has different rules.
Very different ones too.
All over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So everywhere from simply needing that burial transfer permit and then maybe another certificate from the mortuary, all the way up to you have to have the consulate involved. Mm-hmm. Work has to be translated into the country's primary language. All this extra documentation needs to come from the consulate. So if you're thinking about flying with ashes out of the United States, I would definitely get in touch with the consulate of that country to see what their restrictions are.
Well, and the funeral home could certainly help facilitate that too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, come on. It's very common to travel.
But yeah, flying within the United States, easy peasy.
What about traveling with an intact body? Like, maybe the body is taken to the cemetery after a home funeral. Is there any issue with like crossing county lines or state lines when you're transporting a body? Is that covered by that same
county lines? Because like I was mentioning, like Moles up in Bellingham, and that's like what, 2 or 3 counties away from King County. Mm-hmm. Yeah, within the state, no, super easy.
Like we were mentioning White Eagles all the way down in South Washington. So, and state to state, I'm pretty sure that's the part I'm murky on. Beverly might have to get back to you. We don't have too many people want to take somebody out of state. I mean, what am I saying? I just had somebody fly in from New York.
Yeah.
And that, like, the funeral director in New York got all the necessary New York government paperwork, their version of a burial transit permit, and sent that over to me. And then he flew over here and he'll be buried in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, as far as a family bringing it across state lines, I'm pretty sure you can do that too. If you have a big enough truck or van to carry, you know, a body or casket in, you know, we would just say on the burial transit permit that the body is going to be transported out of state. And yeah, definitely discuss that with your funeral home who'll be doing the arrangements, but not impossible. So
No, this stuff's real common, so don't feel weird asking about it when you are making arrangements.
yeah,
Just know that things can vary pretty wildly between states, and you want to make sure you cover your bases.
yeah.
You might have a really awkward conversation with a cop out on a rural road.
Yeah, I will say, like, I've had families who have really wanted to transport their own loved one, like for instance to White Eagle down in South Central Washington. And you know, I just explained, like, really it's ideal, especially if somebody's gonna be in a casket, like it's really ideal to have a van, truck that's, like, you know, long to fit the casket,
So you can safely secure it and everything.
make sure it's not gonna, like, jostle around. Yeah. So I'm, like I said, I encourage families to do it. I just want to stress that it's not like, oh, we're driving grandma to the cemetery. Like, think about it, you know, make sure you actually are up for doing it. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Oh my goodness, so many good questions. I checked in with our host and they said, well, you can have a few more minutes. So let's see if we can cram a couple more questions.
We'll wrap it up by 15 after. How's that?
I think that's a very sensible compromise.
Yeah.
Well, some of the questions we've been getting are about other organizations, like questions about the cost of NOR between a couple of the Washington providers, or questions about the work that End of Life Washington does. And I could say that, you know, it's best to go directly to those organizations to get your questions answered, so that we don't accidentally play telephone about their work and misrepresent what they're working on. They would do the best job, you know, answering their own questions about that stuff. Let's see what else we've got.
Yeah, I mean, it's a free market and we're all businesses. So much like every restaurant can decide how much their burger costs, every funeral home can decide how much their burial or natural organic production costs.
That makes sense.
Question, or the simple answer to that question.
I'll make sure that in the follow-up email, actually, we send a link to the results of our biennial price survey. So that way it'll hopefully save you a couple phone calls. I mean, we survey every funeral home in Washington to kind of compile all those resources, all that information. And it's now searchable, so you don't even have to deal with the huge spreadsheet anymore. And so that way you can search for where you live and kind of get an idea for what the going rates are in your general area. So you can kind of plan accordingly and get an idea, because this is, yeah, it's the free market and businesses get to make their own choices about prices.
Yeah.
And we're just
Everyone
trying to
has a
be
different-
transparent.
Yeah, everybody has a different setup, different overhead costs. You know, do you want no frills? Do you want super fancy? Like, obviously super fancy is going to come with costs too. So,
well, speaking of crossing state lines, what if someone, you know, they feel real motivated, all that New Year's energy, they plan out the perfect service they want for themselves, and then they up and move to Colorado? What happens to all the plans that they made?
yeah, it's oh, sorry, I saw that last question.
Focus.
I think I was saying human composting is actually by and far the most eco-friendly, but let me finish this question. Yeah, unfortunately, like I said a couple of times through this, every state is different with their laws. So there might be some carryover from what you did here in Washington for your paperwork, especially Colorado is also such a, like, progressive, especially in death care. I mean, it's no big surprise that they were, like, the second state to legalize human organic reduction. And, like, I've seen super rabid green funeral homes in Colorado. So I don't know what their laws are though, but I'm guessing that because of that, there's probably some good crossover. But yeah, you would need to check with a funeral home in your new state of residence on what their laws are.
And PMA, a lot of times when folks tell us they're anticipating a move, we encourage them to reach out to an affiliated organization with us under that umbrella of the Funeral Consumers Alliance to kind of get the scoop on what local laws are and what kind of paperwork they might need to do, because like the disposition authorization that Rachel showed early in the presentation, that's only valid in Washington. So if you do leave Washington, you're going to need to make sure that you get your documents updated to meet your state's requirements. And we actually had someone who had a question about that disposition form. The part where you ask for a witness signature, is it okay if that witness is your spouse?
As far as I know, it can be your spouse. Let me look at it again to make sure what it says. Technically, it should be someone who's maybe not as invested in, but I mean, if it's your spouse and they're the witness and they're still alive, like if any question came into play on this form, your spouse would be your next of kin anyway. So even if they somehow goofed up on that form, we're still taking our, charges from them. So yeah, spouse is fine for that.
Yeah, and that slide was a little on the text heavy side, so we understand if you guys didn't get all your notes down for that, but we're going to include the slides so you can refer back to that. For the most part, most families find that it works just fine to go with whatever the state considers your next of kin, because a lot of times that's just your spouse or your kids. But if you would like someone else to run point on this, it's important you put it in writing, because in Washington state, your power of attorney expires at death. So you have to have a designated agent who is sort of your POA for death choices. So something to put thought into. I'll make sure that I include the disposition authorization template in that follow-up email, as well as the designated agent form. I'm gonna make myself a note here.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that briefly. Yeah, to underscore that, because I hear it almost every day. Power of attorney ends at death. So if you think that you have power to make decisions about someone's funeral because you're a power of attorney, you don't. So I hear it all the time. I'm the power of attorney. I get to tell you what to do. So yeah, become the designated agent. Anyway, one more question, and then I guess we gotta go.
All right. Well, it's 6:14 now. So
you want to say that was the last question? Okay,
we're gonna have to. I think we got through all of them. But if there's a lot to kind of chew on here, and it's not uncommon for it to take a little bit of time of metabolizing this information to kind of figure out what your question is. So the follow-up email again will include contact information for the co-op funeral home, as well as me at PMA, so that you can reach out to us to get your questions answered. And also, if you have questions about organizations we mentioned, feel free to reach out to those folks directly to kind of get the scoop on what their work is. Of course, they're just as passionate as we are about offering you death care options. And though Rachel herself is very excited about Aquamation, it's important to remember that we don't have any vested interest in the choices that you're making. We just want you to know what your options are, give you kind of some ballpark figures about numbers to help you as you're doing some comparison shopping. And I know that lots of folks are real uncomfortable with the idea of comparison shopping, but I think it's important to remember that, if you buy a refrigerator, you're going to spend a lot less money than you are on a funeral. And you better bet that the average person buying a new fridge probably has a spreadsheet and all kinds of notes of all the exact things they want and the warranties and what's included. So it's really normal and healthy to take that same approach to purchasing death care for yourself. You want to make sure your needs are met, because your needs are your own and the funeral home works for you. So I'm hoping that this information that Rachel hit you with is going to really help you make sure that you're getting the care that meets your needs specifically. Just some folks chiming in to say thank you so much for all of that information. It was really wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. Did you want to say anything before we close out today, Pam?
No, just thank you very much. We really learned a lot. So
wonderful.
Thank you, and I'll see you next week.
Awesome. Well, I hope to see some of our attendees today next week. Again, we're going to be talking about estate planning. And lots of times folks hear that title and think, well, I'm not wealthy. What do I need to plan for? Well, everybody needs to do some estate planning, even those of us who work at nonprofits and don't really have any assets. You want to make sure that your secret love letters from college don't end up in the wrong hands. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone.